The blinding surge of blue light from my vintage turbine shot through the barn rafters like a lightning strike. I snapped awake at 2:17 a.m. to the sharp crackle of electricity and a thick, choking stench of melting insulation. Bolting down the narrow attic stairs in nothing but boots and boxers, I skidded to a stop at the base of the generator, an 1800s relic my great-great-grandmother had designed and hand-assembled. It was running hot, redlining on output, but outside the wind was dead still. Then I saw them, fat orange power cords, half a dozen, slithering out the rear barn door like a nest of eels. I grabbed my flashlight and followed them, heart pounding, straight into the dark. They trailed across the field, arcing around the edge of my orchard, and there, crouched by my fuse panel, was Meredith Langston, our self-proclaimed WA president. She wore thick rubber gloves and held wire strippers like surgical tools. Meredith had cut straight into my primary power feed and was siphoning off juice toward her massive estate over 2 acres away. I'm Lucas Bennett, and my family's homestead, Summit Trail Ranch, has stood untouched for 6 generations. The jewel of our land is that century-old wind turbine. It powers our home, barns, and wells off-grid. That machine has braved hurricanes, droughts, and 3 economic collapses. But even it wasn't built to handle Meredith Langston. She moved in from the suburbs 3 years ago, immediately establishing a homeowners association by manipulating a loophole in the land deed registry. No one asked for it. No one voted. She just formed a board, appointed herself as chairwoman, and started cracking down on everything that didn't fit her vision. My first violation: improper display of antique farming tools. She meant the hand-carved hay rake my grandfather had welded to our gate as a tribute. The next was for allowing free-range chickens within 40 feet of a public path. This path, it cuts right through my ranch. Then came the absurdity. Meredith declared my irrigation trench a hazard to pedestrians, even though it was fenced and 30 feet from the nearest road. She used a drone to photograph my cattle, mailed noise complaints over wind chimes, and even filed for a visual pollution citation because my red barn disrupted the skyline. But nothing topped tonight. As I stared at her splicing wires under moonlight, I realized this wasn't just harassment, it was theft. Pure and deliberate. She'd cut through a section of my boundary fence and disabled my motion detectors. What she didn't know was that I'd installed thermal cameras in the rafters after her last surprise safety inspection. I backed away silently and called the sheriff. While I waited, I streamed the security footage on my phone. Meredith had arrived just before 2 a.m., used bolt cutters on my gate, and carefully tested voltage points with a digital meter. She wasn't guessing. She had diagrams and equipment. This was calculated. The deputies arrived quietly, just as I'd requested. I met them halfway down the gravel drive and handed Deputy Torres the live feed from my barn. He whistled low and radioed for backup and a fire marshal. They recognized this immediately, not just as theft, but as a potential structural fire threat. We moved in slowly. Meredith didn't flinch. She was still working, carefully wrapping her illegal wiring in black tape. When the uniforms closed in, she tried her usual barrage of false authority. Claimed she was conducting a sanctioned WA safety inspection. Deputy Torres pointed to the live cords snaking toward her home. She said they were already there, and that I must have planted them. But the evidence was overwhelming. Fresh copper shavings glistened in the flashlight beams. Her wire snips were warm. And the cameras hadn't missed a second. More officers arrived. Meredith's tone shifted from superior to unhinged. She said I'd given her verbal permission. When pressed for details, she stumbled and said something about needing backup power for community-wide surveillance. The fire marshal examined her wiring setup and stepped back with a curse. He declared it a blatant breach of multiple electrical safety codes and a fire risk to any livestock housed nearby. That put her in felony territory. An investigation followed. The cords led straight to a concealed power box on her patio. She had been leeching power from my turbine to run her heated greenhouse and ornate garden lights. According to the wear on the connectors, she'd been doing it for nearly a month. Since my system wasn't tied to the municipal grid, there was no spike in billing, but the stolen wattage was substantial. Officers documented the scene in painstaking detail. They bagged tools, measured wire length, and took photos of every connection. The fire marshal calculated $1,300 worth of stolen electricity, plus damages. He also noted her wiring was so unsafe that a small surge could have ignited a fire in my barn, which still housed livestock. Meredith, flailing, accused me of baiting her, and said the generator was a shared resource because it was visible from the road. Deputy Torres calmly read her rights and listed her charges: trespassing, utility theft, reckless endangerment, and criminal mischief. Meredith tried one last Hail Mary, threatening to file suit against the entire county. Didn't work. The moment the cuffs snapped shut, a wave of disbelief washed over me. For years, she'd tormented us with her bogus ordinances. Now she was in custody, ranting about bylaws in board meetings as they escorted her to the cruiser. A crowd had begun to gather. Folks from neighboring properties showed up in robes and headlights. Tim Holloway, whose water well Meredith tried to condemn for being visually disruptive, clapped and called it poetic justice. Betty Durham snapped pictures from her porch, saying she needed proof that tyrants sometimes fall. The fire marshal handed me a summary report. My generator was not only up to code, it was classified as a historical asset under state preservation law. Any tampering with it added additional felony charges. Estimated repair costs, $6,200. Prosecutors didn't hold back: trespassing with intent to commit theft, felony tampering with protected infrastructure, grand theft utility, endangerment involving livestock, and organized fraud once they uncovered a binder in her car with schematics for 3 other homes she'd been planning to tap next. Yes, she had spreadsheets, calculations of how much power she could steal undetected from each neighbor. One entry was labeled, Bennett Turbine Output Averages. She even had notes on how to disable trail cameras. At arraignment, Meredith stood before a local judge, a third-generation farmer who'd once been fined by her for planting, non-compliant, corn rows. He set bail at $55,000 and issued a restraining order against her for the entire district. Later that night, the WA board convened without her. They voted to terminate the organization entirely. Unanimous. 29-0. The DA offered her a deal: plead guilty to felony theft and trespass, serve 6 months in county, pay restitution, and complete 400 hours of historical property service. She refused, claiming WA officials had regulatory latitude. Her lawyer promised a jury would sympathize. He was wrong. The trial took 4 days and turned into a regional circus. She testified about protecting the neighborhood and preventing energy hoarding. The jury saw the footage, read the blueprints, and heard 19 neighbors describe years of WA abuse. Deliberation took less than 90 minutes. Guilty. The judge, unmoved, sentenced Meredith to 18 months in state prison, plus $25,000 restitution, permanent disqualification from WA or municipal leadership, and 600 hours of mandatory service helping preserve rural landmarks. Her expression? Complete devastation. Her attorney had promised probation. As the bailiff approached for the second set of cuffs, Meredith wept about just trying to bring order. Nobody clapped. Nobody comforted her. Not after the years of bullying, fines, and surveillance. Her real estate license was suspended by the following Monday. Her husband filed for divorce within the week. Sometimes, justice takes a while. But when it lands hard.